Hey, Aravind. Wanted to make sure and get this re-recorded. I'm so sorry it didn't record the first one like we originally thought, but anyway, wanted to make sure and get this over to you. So we're just gonna start from the top, and I'm not gonna spend too much detail. I'm sorry, too much time going into too much detail, but of course we want to make sure one, you get all the information and clarity, and then two, we can clearly communicate the strategy to your CPA. It sounds like she has a really good grasp of it already, so I'm impressed to hear that. But of course, we just wanted to make sure and fill in any gaps. Now, specifically, this particular policy, just kind of again starting from the top. We're using Emeritus. They're one of our preferred providers right now. We look at it from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. So from the quantitative perspective, as far as the financials, the background, obviously Emeritus has all that. We only work with A-rated companies. They've been around since 1878. They have a strong dividend history. So all of those things fall into place. From a qualitative perspective, one of the things that we really try to emphasize with our clients is it's not just getting the policy and seeing the numbers on paper. It's actually being able to put the policy to work, use the policy and get access to the cash, which, believe it or not, sometimes different companies can be difficult to work with. All of that to say, Emeritus is actually it's a very pro IBC company in that they have actually implemented the infrastructure and systems to be able to help clients get money in and out, right? Obviously, IBC is a high transaction type strategy, so being able to move the money in and out is really important. So, this access policy specifically, this product was specifically designed for infinite banking. So they took the actuaries and they took the IBC practitioners, put them together in a room, and they came out with this design. I'll go into a little bit more about that here shortly, but regardless, this is one of our preferred companies, and they have a great both financial side from the cash value, but also from the utilization. I'm going to go into all this other stuff later. For now, we're going to focus on the actual design. So, with what we've got this set up for currently, we're showing putting in 100,000 total. You're 43. And also, I don't know if we talked about, I think we did. You got a preferred plus health rating. So good job, by the way. That is the top tier health rating. According to the insurance company, you're going to live forever. So that's great. Really good job there. Now, of the 100,000 that's going in there, and really, if you remember, what we talked about was with the liquidity that you have, we don't want to put all of that towards a policy, right? That's not gonna be the best way to manage that cash. So we're really just taking a section of the liquidity that you have and applying it to the policy, so that you can turn around and use it in your business, in your growth, or any other investments that you come across. So with that being said, that 100,000 total that's going into the policy is broken up into two funding levels. The first one is your base premium, and that's what you see right here. So the base premium with these two numbers combined, they equal that 20,000 base. So that 20,000 base premium, that's kind of the minimum or the quote unquote heartbeat to keep the policy going and alive. And so that 20,000 includes both your whole life side, which has everything we've talked about up to this point. It has the cash value, it has the guaranteed growth, the dividends, the tax benefits, the asset protection, all of the things, right? All the great things we've talked about. And so with that, we also layered a 10-year term rider on top of the whole life, okay? So you can see that right here. Why did we do that? Well, the term rider, which is just an attachment, right? So think about like if you buy a car and then you add a spoiler, right? Like it's just an attachment that goes to the vehicle. Same thing here. This is an attachment to your whole life policy. And what it does is it gives you a lot more death benefit, clearly, for a very low cost, right? So this is a very cost-effective way to increase your death benefit without increasing your cost. Now, of course, that cost is all baked into that same 20, right? So we didn't change that at all. It's all baked in. But what that term does is by increasing the death benefit, That increases the MEC limit or the modified endowment contract. That is the IRS's cap of saying, hey, Aravind, you can take advantage of this and you can use all the great things here, but you can only do so much, right? And so by adding more death benefit, that gives you the ability to put more cash in and take higher advantage of the policy. So in this example, the flexible paid up rider, so FPUR stands for flexible paid up rider. This is straight cash. This is the overfunding or the cash portion that you're putting into your policy. Okay. And so with that term rider, you're able to put in 80,000 of cash. Now, if we were to take this term rider off, the amount of cash that you could put into this thing would be significantly reduced. It would be maybe like 35 or so, maybe 40, right? It would be significantly lower. So by adding that term rider, we can put in significantly more cash, accelerate the growth, and really get your policy really, we talk about rocket fuel, right? Get this thing started off on the right foot very, very quickly. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, why don't I just put all term and no whole life, right? Now, there is a point of diminishing returns, right? If we add too much term and start to take away from the whole life, well, the whole life is the part that has the cash value and the guarantees and all that. So there is a balance where we can't do too much term because then it just becomes, more cost than benefit. So really, we just try to make sure that we're staying within that reasonable range where, hey, you can get more cash in, but it's not costing you too much on the term side. Okay, because the term is just term. It doesn't earn cash. It doesn't earn dividends. It's just adding that term. Now, so that's the first thing that it does is your term policy gives you the ability to put more cash in. That's number one. Number two is later on down the road, if you decide that you want to convert this term, if you want to convert that to more whole life, you will be able to do so, no questions asked. You will get to keep the same preferred plus health rating. You're going to be able to convert this term to more whole life, keeping that same health rating, regardless of if anything has changed in your health. So, again, we always pray for a long, healthy life. Aravind, you're going to be great. However, in the worst case scenario, something happens to your health, you can convert this term, no questions asked, for the same preferred plus health rating to more whole life. Now, why would you want to do that? We'll get into that in just a minute, okay? Let's come down here. Again, we'll go through all this other stuff later. Oh, I want to look at the MEC limit. Yeah, so your MEC limit here, modified endowment contract, so that's where the term MEC comes from. This is the IRS's way. This is their limit, right? They use the 7-pay test. It's a crazy complicated algorithm. But essentially, they're just saying, hey, you can take advantage of this, but you can only do so much. And really, what we're looking at is your MEC limit is 103,905, which really, this 100,000, that means we're really, really close. What we want to do is whatever the IRS says, hey, you can only do so much to this, so much of this to your own benefit. Well, guess what? We probably want to do as much of that thing as possible, right? Because it's obviously if they're limiting it, it's because it's for our benefit and not theirs. So we want to take full advantage. So that point is, with your funding level, we want to get it as close to this MEC limit as possible. And we are. We're really, really close, which means this is a high efficiency policy. We're getting as much cash as we possibly can in there. So again, we'll come back to all this other stuff later. But don't worry about the MEC. You cannot accidentally MEC a policy. Um, there are plenty of firewalls in place. They have letters and they'll contact us. Like if you put in $105,000, they'll call us and say, hey, Aravind's going to make us policy if we do that. And we get in touch with you. You say, oh, no, my bad. I didn't mean to do that. And they'll send you the refund, right? So don't stress. It's not going to happen accidentally, but just know when we reference the MEC limit, that's what we're talking about. All right, so moving on. Let me come down here. We're going to look at the year by year breakdown again. We'll come through all this other stuff later. All right, so there are two columns. We have the guaranteed side and we have the non-guaranteed side. Remember, the only thing that is not guaranteed about these policies are the annual dividends. That is the only thing not guaranteed, and that's the only difference between these two sides. The non-guaranteed has dividends, the guaranteed does not. Emeritus, again, I think they were established in 1878. Anyway, it's been a long time. They have paid a dividend every single year since their inception. So when we talk about the policy and the design and the projections, we feel very, very confident at looking at this side because that is the most accurate depiction of what their policy and what the cash value is going to look like just based off of everything that they've done for the last 120 years, right? Actually, 150, goodness gracious. So the point is, we are looking at the right-hand side. And with that, let's go through this year by year. So, year one, if you were to put $100,000 in, you would have access to about 78. Now, here's the question. Where did the I'm sorry, we put the 80 towards cash. Now, a little bit of that goes to the death benefit, and I'll get into why in just a minute. But where did that other 20 go? The 20,000 of base premium. Well, this is where we refer to this, and I think most real estate investors handle this and get this better than anybody because real estate investors, business owners, entrepreneurs, we get this better than anyone else because we understand the process of acquiring an asset. If I buy a business, if I buy a property, there are closing costs associated with acquiring that asset. Okay. And that is essentially what's happening here is year one is where the bulk of the cost is because that's where the acquisition of the overall asset is coming into play. So that 20,000 of premium in year one is going to the purchase of the policy and you're locking in the asset and you're locking in that health rating and everything else that's outlined moving forward. So really, I mean, and this is kind of morbid, but the insurance company does have the highest risk in year one because let's say you put $100,000 in and God forbid you walk outside and get hit by a bus. Okay. The insurance company is on the hook to pay out over $2 million. Okay. And that's where they're saying, hey, Aravind, you can have the 80 of cash. Now, a portion of that does go to the death benefit, and that is what keeps before I get into that, the cash value and the growth within the cash value is all baked into the death benefit. That's why, as your cash value, as you can see, the cash value is going up, you can see that the death benefit is continually going up. That is a beautiful and strategic design because that does a couple things. One, that is what keeps the death benefit and the cash value, all of this growth. Like if you were to pass away right here, you've only put in $715,000, but it pays out almost 2.5 million. It's not like you get your basis out tax free. You get the whole thing out tax free. So all of this growth and the interest and the dividends that have been accruing inside of this thing, they will pay out tax free. So that's the first thing is the cash is correlated to the death benefit, which is what keeps it at a tax-free payout, number one. Number two, because the cash value is correlated to your death benefit, that is what keeps the cash inside of your policy from being creditor and predator protected. So creditors and predators, like lawsuits, the cash is shielded and protected from being seized by those outside threats because your cash value is correlated to your death benefit. So that's not by accident. That's not, that is a very strategic design. And so that's why we always say, like, look, we're putting money in here. It increases the death benefit, but you have access to all of this. Everything in the cash value column is what you have access to. Okay. So year one, you're purchasing the policy. The insurance company takes your 20,000 and they put it to the side just to be good stewards and make sure they can pay the liabilities that they have with this agreement that they've gone into with you. Now, year two, here's what's interesting. Year two, you put in a new 100,000 and your cash value, you can see goes from 78,000 and it goes up to 172. So you put in 100 and it grows by almost 94.8. So not quite 95,000, but over 94. You're putting in 100 and you're getting out 94. So what does that mean? That means that not only is the 80,000 of cash that you're putting in going towards the cash, but now a majority of that 20,000 of premium is also going to cash. Because you're so young and you're so healthy, right? You got a great age and health rating here. They're saying, hey, we don't really need to put much to the side to account for risk in year two. Same thing happens in year three. You put in 100,000 and your cash goes from 172 to 270. So it grows by about, what is that? About 98,000. So not quite dollar for dollar, but really, really close in year three. Okay. So year four, you put in 100, and this cash value goes from 270 to 372. So you're putting in 100 and you're getting out almost 102 in that same year. So at this point, essentially what's happened is you have overcome the acquisition cost of the policy. You are now, and again, this sounds morbid, but the company says, hey, Aravind, we're good. We have enough money set to the side that we can account for and pay any and all liabilities and obligations that we have to you. So now we're good. You can just, your money's going to rock and roll. That drag is no longer on there. And that's why you start to see what we call the multiplier, where you start to see the compound interest curve. We all know that compound interest starts off here and then we have that exponential tick up, right? So that's what's happening here in the cash value. Now in year five, you drop down to just doing 20. You're not doing any extra. You're only doing the bare minimum, okay? In year five, you do the bare minimum of putting 20,000 in, and your cash goes from 372 to 406. So you're putting in 20 and it's growing by, what is that, like 34? So now you're not just getting dollar for dollar, you're starting to benefit from and you're seeing the compound interest that's been accruing nonstop and undisturbed over and over and over. You're starting to see that really tick into. So year five, we start to see that. And really that number and that increase just gets better. So like here in year 10, you put in 20,000 and it's growing up to 660. So you're putting in 20 and it's growing by like 46, 47, right? So you're starting to see that number really, or 48, actually, almost 48. So you're starting to see that this is not, and this is where we start to have that mind shift of if I'm putting $20,000 into something and it's growing by 48, 47, how much is it costing me that year? Right? Like at that point, you're like, oh, it's not, right? Like I'm able to recycle money in and out of this asset, right? In and out of this private account. And that's why I know it kind of sounds silly, and I mentioned this on the call, but I have several policies. One actually just renewed this June. I have another one coming up in December. But as silly as it sounds, I look forward to putting money in my policy because I know every dollar that I put in, I'm going to be able to take out more than that because I've allowed my compound interest to accrue and compound. Okay. Now, a couple of things, and we'll get into some of the what if scenarios. Um, You'll notice that after 10 years, the premium drops, as does the death benefit a little bit. Okay. Well, what happened? Well, remember that term rider we had on there was only 10 years. So after 10 years, if you do not convert it, meaning you don't change it from term to more whole life, it's going to expire. That's what term does. Okay. And it just drops off. Also, this policy is paid up after age 75. So age 75, it is paid off. You own it outright. You couldn't put more money into this thing if you wanted to. So again, this is an asset. You are paying this off, building up equity inside of this asset as you go, and you've paid it off. So now you're putting in zero. But what's cool is look, I mean, you're putting in zero and it's still growing by what is that? Not quite, what is that? 120 something, 120 grand. So now you're putting in zero, but you're still seeing the benefit of that compound interest. Okay. So it's growing and growing and growing. Um, Also your dividends are getting bigger as you go. And so let's come back to that conversion. Let's say you get to year five. And you are now, if you have max funded and you did all 400,000 in the first 4 years, which you don't have to, we'll get into all the what ifs in a minute. But if you max fund this and you get to year five and you're, oh man, now you are going to be stuck only being able to put in 20,000. You might have a little bit of room, but for the most part, you are going to be stuck to putting in 20,000 because if you put in too much, remember, you will make the policy. So now you are limited to only putting in 20K. And you call me, you're like, hey, Erica, I'm used to putting 100 grand into this thing. Now I can only put in 20. And you know what? When I started, I was comfortable with 20,000 being my minimum. That was fine. But now business has grown. and cash flow has grown. My overall financial picture has accelerated. And I am, 20,000 was good when I started, but now maybe I want my new minimum to be 25 or 30, right? Whatever. It doesn't matter. So what we'll do is we'll go back up to that good old term writer that's up here and we say, hey, insurance company, Aravind doesn't want his minimum to be 20 anymore. Maybe he wants it, again, let's say 30. I'm just going to use easy round numbers. We want to increase the minimum by 10,000. And they're going to run the calculation and they say, okay, if you want the new minimum to go up by 10,000, you need to convert, I don't know, maybe you need to convert 500,000. Okay. So they tell you you convert 500,000 of your term to more whole life. And what that does is it increases the base premium. That means that you're increasing your minimum. But what happens when you increase your minimum? You increase your maximum. So that means if you want to put more in later, you can convert this term to more whole life. And when you convert it, guess what? This new whole life is going to have its own 7-pay test, which means you're going to be able to put in not just more base premium, but also more of these FPURs. You're going to be able to put in more cash. Okay. Now, it's not going to be at the same scale as what it was in the beginning, but the point is, do you have to do that? No. But it usually happens around year 5 or 6 because we start to see, oh, wait a minute, I'm putting in 20 and it's growing by 37, well, heck yeah, I want to put in 25 or 30, right? Like if I'm getting more out than what I'm putting in, well, why would I not put more in, right? So we usually start to see that around 5 or 6. It is an option. It is not obligatory. So you can do that if you want. And if you don't want, that's totally fine. The term just falls off later. Now, I will say, you have up until 2 years of expiration to convert. So on a 10-year term, you have until year 8. So up until year 8, you have time to convert. Okay. Now, I'll tell you this too. There's a very high possibility just with what you're building and what you're doing that you can add more policies to yourself later on if you want to. So if you want to convert, great. If you're still healthy and you just want to add a whole new policy, you can do that too. Again, we will cross that bridge when we get to it. I mean, I have 4, so I think David has 4 or 5 himself, but the point is you have options and you have the ability to make this bigger in the future if you want to. Okay. Now let's get into all the what if scenarios. We've talked about the bunnies and the rainbows. Let's talk about all of the uh-ohs. So you'll notice, like we already showed, that we are illustrating, we are putting out that you're funding 100,000 for 4 years. So what happens is what we have people that ask different questions. They might say, "Hey, I want to take all of this money and I want to funnel it all into year 1." Well, if we put all of the money into year 1, the hurdle with that is year 1 is where you have the most exposure to cost. So what we do is we want to minimize cost and maximize cash value. So we don't want to put all the cash into year 1, right? Because that if we did that, then you would have the most cost, and that's not conducive and that's not good stewardship of what we're trying to design. Now, on the other hand, you might say, well, hey, what if I took this 400,000 and instead of putting it in over 4 years, what if I stretched that out over 7, 8, 9 years? You could totally do that. You could absolutely put in less money over a longer period of time. Yes, totally doable. Now, if we put in less money over a longer period of time, we just have to know that that's going to slow down the compound interest accrual because if we're putting in less money over a longer period of time, that just slows down the interest compounding. Now, is that a bad thing? No, like that's totally doable, but just to be aware of that. So the reason that we show 4 years is this is really kind of the sweet spot that we have found to be able to get as much cash in as early as possible to accelerate the growth as quickly as possible while still minimizing the cost. Okay, so this 4 years is the sweet spot. Do you have to do 100,000 every single year? No. What happens is year 1 is the most important year for any policy. Okay. So what you fund in year one is going to set the threshold and it sets what the capacity is for this policy. Okay. So if you do 100,000 in year one, then that is your new maximum. If you only wanted to do 50 or 75 in year one, that's fine. 50 or 75 would be the new maximum. Okay. So let's say you do 100,000 in year one, great. Then you get to year two and you say, oh my gosh, you know what? I can't do the full 100,000. Maybe I can only do, maybe you do 40. Okay. No big deal. You do 40 in year two. And then year three, you're like, oh man, things are really tight. I can only do the 20. No big deal, right? The minimum is 20, the maximum is 100. You can go anywhere in between because you set that maximum in year one. Okay. So year two, you do 40, year three, you do 20, and then maybe in year four, you come back to doing the full 100, right? Things are rocking and rolling. You're good to go. Now let's look at year five. Year five, your maximum has been 100 every year. But because you didn't hit that maximum in year two and year three, you set the maximum in year one, but you didn't hit it in year two and year three. When you get down here to year five, instead of being restricted to only putting in 20,000, you have room from not maxing out in year two and three that you can come back and make up what you didn't get in those years. You can make that up in these subsequent years to catch up what you didn't hit. Okay. So are you going to get the interest for those last few years? No, right? Like if we don't put the money in, we don't get the interest. But you have the funding flexibility to make it back up and put the money in these later years to catch up what you didn't get into in those previous years, which is why one of the questions I always get is why does it say, oops, why does it say under the FPUR that there's an acceptable funding range? Okay? So here it says there's an acceptable funding range between 40 and 160. Basically, what this is saying is if you put in less than 40,000 of cash after year one, if you put in less than 40,000 of cash, then it might reduce your MEC limit a little bit. It's not a big number, right? So it's really kind of negligible. But you can also up to double up. So if you miss all 80,000, coming back down here, try not to make you sick. So let's say like in year three, you missed all 80,000, and maybe here in year six, you want to come back and make up that full 100,000. Great. Or in year four, you want to put in your 20 and your 80 for year four, which is a total of 100, and you want to make up from the 80 that you didn't get in year three, you could do 160,000 here in year four. So I'm again, we can cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't want to make it too complicated. The point is that you have flexibility to do minimum of 20, maximum of 100, anywhere in between. And if you don't hit your max in these years, you can make up for it later on to catch up. Okay? So again, don't get too hung up on that. That's why we're here. That's why we meet on at least an annual basis to make sure that we're staying on top of, hey, what's your funding? Where are you at? Do we need to do a catch up and everywhere in between? Okay. Let me see. What else do we need to go through? Oh, you do have options of your loan. So let me erase this. You have options for your loan. You can take out a fixed loan or you can take out a variable loan. Do not freak out with this variable word, okay? I know a lot of people are hypersensitive to that, especially in this environment. Can the rate change? Yes. They cannot change the rate more than once a year. Each year at your anniversary, this interest rate can fluctuate, but I have not seen them fluctuate very much. In fact, mine in my policy that just renewed this June, my interest rate went down, right? Because interest rates have gone down. So I actually got a lower interest rate, which was pretty nice. So they can't change it more than once a year. Additionally, we do not see the massive swings with these companies like what we see in the traditional investment or banking space. So between 2019 and 2025, obviously we have had the craziest interest rate swings. This has been a very volatile time in the marketplace. We have not seen, I think in 2019, the interest rates were like 4.95%. And I never saw them get over 6 all throughout that time period. So even during this crazy swing of interest rates over the last several years, these companies have not had major swings, right? And they've been very incremental. We call them the silent giants because they're huge. They do not move and they do not function on time periods of 1, 2, or even 10 years. These guys are functioning on 100-year time periods. So, my analogy, you can tell I use a lot of analogies. This is like a cruise ship, right? They don't make big changes very quickly. They make gradual changes based off of big movements. It's not like a speedboat where you're getting thrown around from left to right. So this is just that consistent, steady eddy, where you know what's happening. There's no big changes, right? This is your private bank. We don't want our bank having a lot of volatility. Okay. Now, the reason that people would use a variable loan is because it does not affect the growth and the dividend earnings within the policy. This is a non-recognized loan option. It does say here it's based off of the Moody Corporate Bond Yield Average. Now, the fixed loan is a little bit less, so it's a 4%. But here's the thing. What that does is it does reduce the earnings within the account, right? You can see that there. The fixed loan does reduce the earnings. So you have the option to choose, hey, do I want to take a fixed loan? Do I want to take a variable loan? And again, this is why we are here. We meet with you and we go through it and say, hey, Aravind, what are you looking at? What do you wanting to do? Let's talk through the strategy here. Excuse me. So, for example, maybe in year one, again, your dividend in the year one is not super high. In fact, you know how I mentioned that Emeritus designed this access policy specifically for infinite banking? This is what they did. No company has the silver bullet or a magic pill, right? Nobody has more money than the other. They're all doing the same thing. They just move and adjust things based off of what they're trying to accomplish. So what they said was when designing this policy, they said, what do infinite banking people want? Well, they want upfront access to cash and they want long-term growth. So how did they make that happen? Well, we have really good access to cash up front, right? We've got really good liquidity and we see the long-term growth component is obviously there. In exchange for having the upfront cash, that's why your dividend in the first few years is so low. The money, here's the thing, money, there's no free money. We got to get it from somewhere. So they gave higher access to cash value and they reduced the dividend in the first couple of years. And then you notice after the first couple of years, your dividend skyrockets. What happened? Well, basically what Emeritus said was, well, hey, after the first couple of years, right, and this policy is growing and compounding and you're done doing your overfunding, now you can start to see more bang for your buck and the dividend schedule resets back to where it would have been if it were never reduced in the first few years. So that's just, again, that's actuarial nerd stuff. It's not super pertinent to you, but my point to that is the dividend is lower in the first few years. That gives you higher access to cash value. What that also means is, let's say you're going to take out a loan and you're in year one of your policy. If you're taking it out in year one and maybe you're only going to have that loan out for a year or two, well, hey, we can take out a fixed rate loan for a lower interest rate because your dividend is really low. You're not giving up a whole lot, right? So a fixed rate in year one might make more sense versus, here in year six, no way, we're going to take the variable, right? Because we don't want to give up 11, 12, $15,000 in dividends. So my point to this is, and you can tell as we go through this, there are so many options and built-in flexibility that as we're going through this, we are working with you to say, hey, Aravind, what's going to work best for you considering the circumstances? Let's look at all of this, right? And that's again why we emphasize that it's important when you work with somebody that they actually know what they're doing because there's a lot of flexibility, and our job is to help you navigate what makes the most sense. Okay, so that's that's on the loan interest side. And the last thing I'll say, one of the main questions that we get is, what is this living benefits? Okay. So living benefits is we've talked about death benefit. When you die, you pass away. The other living benefits are your cash value and the growth and using this money, which I'm going to come back to that real quick before I go on. I know, Aravind, you and I talked about this, but I don't know if your CPA is aware that all of this money, all of this cash value that's outlined here is occurring whether or not you have the money in the policy or not. So when you have this money here, let's say right here in year five, you take out $400,000 and you go invest it in a business or your deal, whatever, you're getting a rate of return outside of the policy. When we use these non-recognized loans, what that means is the company does not recognize that the loan has been taken out and you get the same growth regardless. So you're putting in, you take out 400 grand, you put in 20,000 the next year, and when it grows by the new, whatever that is, 37,000, can we access this whole 443? No, because there's a lien against 400,000 because you took it out to go invest. That's a good thing. But that new money that's there, that new 37 that's available, you can recycle that into the next deal. So you are not resetting your compound interest curve every year. You're allowing all of this growth, all of these earnings. This is all happening while you're using the money on a regular basis to go out and invest. So this is a yes and, not an either or. That is the primary living benefit of this, is being able to put this money out here and go grow. And I just want to emphasize that because this is not a growth play. This is not a rate of return, right? This is infinite banking. It's not infinite investing. This account is meant to be a more efficient bank account, a warehouse for your wealth that you can store your liquidity and use it to go out and invest in whatever you want at the same time. Because in reality, like let's say in another 10 years, guess what? We're going to be in another boom and bust cycle like we always see, right? It's just that's just the nature of the economy. So where are you going to be able to go in another 10 years when we're in another economic downturn that you have all 600 of this, okay? You have all 600,000 out working for you in a deal in 10 years, okay? Where are you going to be able to go that when you put 19,500 into the account, you're going to be able to turn around and access whatever that is, 38,000, 48,000, excuse me. So 47, almost $48,000. You put in 19 and you're going to be able to access 47 and some change. In 10 years, where are you going to be able to do that? Right? Now, does that mean that your 19 is earning 47? No. It means that the full cash value is continuing to accrue even when you have the money out there working for you in a deal. But there's no other asset that functions on that type of platform that gives you the ability to put in the 19, take the full advantage of earning interest and have access to that 47 while this 600 is out here getting you a real rate of return in a real investment. Because remember, your investment is outside of the policy. It's your business, it's your real estate, it's everything else going on. Okay. So that's the big living benefit that we talk about with these policies. The other living benefits are outlined here. Here we go. So again, we always pray for a long, healthy life. But the reality is that that's not always the case. And so this shows what the policy helps cover in the event that you're diagnosed with a terminal illness, chronic illness, or a critical illness. So all of the definitions are outlined here, right? Terminal illness is obviously if you're not going to live within the next 12 months, chronic illness, critical illness, okay? So if you are, God forbid, diagnosed with any of these, the insurance company basically says, hey, Aravind, we're not just going to let you have access to your cash value. We're also going to give you access to your death benefit. So if you get diagnosed with a terminal illness, you get access to 75% of your permanent death benefit. I want to point that out. Notice that it says 917,467. Well, guess what? Your permanent death benefit is starting at 917,467. So it's not factoring in the term. Also, though, remember how I said as your cash value grows, your death benefit grows. It's actually more than that, but anyway, not the point. So, for example, here in year 11, if you're 54 years old, God forbid something happens to you, it's not just the 917 that they'll let you have access to, it's this over $2 million that you would have access to. Same thing here. You would have access to 75% of this 2.4. Or if you get diagnosed, obviously we would want it to be later in life. Maybe you're 90. You have access to $5.2 million, right? That's on the terminal illness side. So this number that they're outlining, this is saying year one, but as your permanent death benefit goes up, obviously you have more access. Chronic illness, you get up to 50%, and critical illness, you get 25%. So again, just wanted to make sure that we outlined all of the good, right? We want to talk about your prosperity and your growth and all the wonderful things that you're doing. But for a plan to work, it has to work in every situation. So we talk about the good. We also need to talk about the bad and the ugly. And so in this context, these policies give you the ability to access not just the cash value, but your death benefit. And you can use that to pay for medical care. You can use that to, cover expenses. I mean, you can take your entire family to Disney World. I don't care. It's up to you, right? So again, we just wanted to make sure and give you the outline of what this looks like. I can send you the illustration and send you the video so that you guys can and play along and look at this as we're going through it. The policy does endow at age 121. What does that mean? At 121 years old, the insurance company taps out and says, "Hey, Aravind, you win." They cut you a check for $11 million tax free. There you go. Right? So at age 121, it endows. But if you pass away before that, whatever this death benefit is at that age, minus any outstanding loans, because you don't have to pay the loans back, remember. So, like here, let's say, oh, you're not going to be 64. Let's say that you pass away at 94. You have a $5.8 million death benefit, but let's say you've taken out $1 million loan and you haven't paid it back. Okay. They're going to say, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Beneficiary, we're so sorry for your loss. Aravind had a $5.8 million death benefit, but he had $1 million in loans outstanding. Here's $4.8 million tax free." Okay. So the loans are always protected. The death benefit's always protected. So that's also why your death benefit is always higher than your cash value. That helps secure you and your family from having any issues. So, all right, I'm gonna stop and let you guys review this. Of course, we're gonna catch up later to review, but if you have any questions between now and then, feel free to let me know. Thanks.